Welcome, everybody. We're glad that you're joining us today for our fifth and final session of Peacemaking across the Christian-Muslim divide. I hope that you've been able to participate in some, or if not all, of our first four sessions. It's been a great pathway so far here at Summit, and we have had some very fruitful conversations, been both intellectually and emotionally and spiritually challenging. And so I'm grateful for all of our presenters and for Garry for co-hosting this pathway with us. And we're thankful for the conversations, and hopefully where those conversations will lead many of us as people who intentionally engage in peacemaking and being agents of reconciliation in the world. And so today we have a great conversation ahead. Before I introduce our presenters, our guests today, and talk about the conversation, Garry and I both want to take just a minute to reflect on the first four sessions that might help set the stage for our conversation today. It's going to be hard to summarize our first four sessions in just a couple minutes because so many great things have been said. But just want to, highlight a few things that I picked up on that I think I'm going to take away, and hopefully you can take away as well. And really comes down to listening to the first four conversations, reflecting on how almost there's two different types of peacemaking that was talked about. One is really just about being a good neighbor and about building friendships and relationships, especially thinking about session 2 with Libby and Tazeen, the way that just living life together and seeing the humanity in the other and being friends, and that so much of peacemaking is about seeing the humanity in the other and treating them as you want to be treated, and loving people and enjoying the friendship regardless of one's faith. And so that's, saw that in that session, but also throughout all of them, that this level of friendship is important, but also then thinking about how peacemaking isn't only just about building friendly relationships, but in the world in which we find ourselves, it does take intentional peacemaking and peace building for peace to be had, for God's shalom to break in. And so it's been great to hear of different examples of intentional initiatives to build peace, to build friendships, to cross the dividing line between our faiths, between Christians and Muslims, and how at this level of intentional peacemaking, it does take building relationships, but it also does take some intentional growth in our understanding. And that if you're going to think about the Christian-Muslim divide, that it takes some seeking understanding of the other's religion and growing in inside of your own faith and being able to articulate your own faith well. And so it matters what you think and what you know and what you understand about your own faith and the other's person's faith. But what's common between both of those is that both of them require putting yourselves in situations where peace can grow. That peace does not happen with distance. And so whether it's just building friendly relationships or engaging in intentional initiatives for peacemaking, it requires getting in contact and being around people, being in solidarity, and that this can't happen just in our minds, that it actually takes entering into relationships. And finally, I would just say, one of the things that stood out was there is a level in which we need to understand Christianity and Islam if we're going to think about peacemaking across the Christian-Muslim divide. But there really is no such thing in reality as Christianity and Islam that we just get to study and then we get to know what somebody else thinks because we've studied the religions, in a textbook or something. While that is important, but really our faiths are incarnate, that they get fleshed out in people's lives, and that it takes getting to know people who are Muslim or who are Christian, and that getting to know the particulars of people's experience of their faith really matters when it comes to peacemaking, because they're real humans, and that our faiths have diversity within our faiths. And so getting to know the people and not just the religion in of itself. So those are some of the things that stood out to me. So Garry, what struck you the past few weeks?
Well, it's been incredible, just listening to different ones. And I think just the idea of having these sessions include someone who represents, well, I guess I shouldn't say represents, but someone who is deeply involved in their faith, who is Muslim and who is Christian, to come into that conversation and engage in dialogue and sort of give us an example of what those conversations look like, how we might engage. So that practical side, and then the content of their conversation, just to help us understand what drives them, and how, what was striking to me, I guess, is how similar we are. Yes, we have some significant differences in the core beliefs of our faiths, but we are humans, and we need love, and we need peace, and we want to have relationships with others. And I think for some people, we really are intrigued by the differences. You know, we like to learn and to engage others and to come to understand things differently. And I think it helps us to understand ourselves. And more than that, I think one of the things that drives me and my interest in these conversations is this belief that God's central intent is to make peace with humanity. You know, our whole being reconciled to God through Christ. That's our faith core, and to do that, we are called to make peace with others. That's part of God's plan for us, and to do that, you know, I think one of the passages that has long been of great interest, and one that I appreciate, is Micah 6:8, where the passage says to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. And I think that defines peace, because I'm not sure we all really understand what peace means. As we want to reach out and be at peace with others, that doesn't mean giving in to whatever someone else says, that we believe what they believe because that's what means to make peace. That's not it at all. We believe in justice. We want to treat others fairly. We want to be treated fairly. And I think John said, was it last year, a couple of years ago, in one of our sessions at Summit, his point was, I want to treat Muslims well because I want them to treat me well, and we can share and have a back and forth in relationship. So I think we are called to be in relationship with each other, and it doesn't mean we give up our core beliefs to be in a friendship with someone who's not Christian. Our best orientation to our faith, and this is something that came out strongly, I think, especially in the first session, where we heard Martin and Sheikh Mohammed talk about just the way that we can best represent our faith. In Martin's book, he talks about the proclamation. And that's how we proclaim our faith, as being a good representative, being a good Christian, is to be that humble servant of God and others. And so I think if we work towards that, God loves us, and we love people out of our love for God and for the grace that's been given to us. And I also heard an emphasis on just this core idea of respect, because I think it's really easy for us to be all about what we believe, and when someone is different, we don't respect that. We need to learn that someone else believes what they believe, and it's worthy of respect. Building relationships with people outside our faith, that's something that Jesus did. And I think we can gain a lot about our own faith by being in relationship with others who are not like us, or with the Muslim person who believes differently. And, you know, I think a lot of people may kind of buy into some of the surface ideas out there, the news and the trends of how we talk about the other. and every Muslim is a terrorist, and Muslims around the world, what do they think of Christians? Well, there's not a sense of good relations. And I think it's really important for us to work on that, to show that there is a different way of looking at this. Our two faiths represent half of the world's population. That's a lot of people who are followers of either one faith or the other. And if we are fueled to be angry and hate each other, what does that mean for the world? This is a calling, and it's very important, and something that I think drives us. And I want to be a spokesperson for the role of peacemaking between the faiths, that we need to have more interfaith dialogue.
Thanks, Garry. Well, we are extremely grateful for the first 4 sessions, for the conversations that we've had. We've got to hear from Muslims, Christians in dialogue. Well, today in our final session, we're going to go a little bit different direction. Our 2 guests you've seen before if you've joined our earlier sessions. Dr. Martin Accad and Dr. John Barton are rejoining us. And instead of this facilitating a dialogue, conversation between a Christian and Muslim, we're going to wrap up our pathway by spending some time reflecting and thinking about what does this mean for the church. So we've heard some great conversations. We've heard different perspectives on peacemaking and interreligious engagement. So what? What do we do now? How are we supposed to understand this? What are we supposed to do? And so John and Martin have all the answers for us today. But we're excited because both of them bring such rich experience and knowledge and wisdom to this type of conversation. So we're excited for the 2 of them to wrap a nice little bow on this today. So what we're going to do is they're each going to introduce themselves briefly for some of you that may not have joined the earlier session, so you know who they are. And then I'm going to ask a couple of questions of them, really focused in on what does this mean now for the church. And they can interact with each other and with us, and we'll have a conversation. And while we're talking and they're responding, please feel free to write some questions in the chat bar. And at the end, we will have some time to ask those questions to Martin and John. And so please do that as you're going along. Put that in the chat bar. So with that said, let me just begin allowing the 2 of you to briefly introduce yourselves. So Martin, why don't you go first?
Good evening. For me, it's evening. Good morning to all of you in North America. My name is Martin Accad. I work at the Arab Baptist Theological Seminary in Beirut, Lebanon. I was founder and director of the Institute of Middle East Studies, which was initiated and launched in 2003, 2004 at ABTS, at the Baptist Seminary. The Institute of Middle East Studies focuses on the study of Islam, Middle Eastern Christianity, Christian-Muslim relations, reflecting on ministry, the church's ministry in its multiple forms in the context of the Muslim world and Muslim societies. So in itself already, an institute like that in the context of a Baptist seminary is not a very usual thing. And if it's seen in North America, I don't know, you guys have to tell me, it certainly was something rather new for the Baptist Church and constituency in Lebanon. But I've been at it for 19 years, and I've grown through it, learned a lot, changed a lot, and I'm happy to share some of that with you tonight. I don't know, Derran, whether you want me to say anything more or give John the opportunity to present himself.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's great. John?
Yeah, thank you. And it's good to be with you all as well, Garry and Derran and Martin. And I'm really glad to be a part of this, knowing that Martin has all the answers that you just said, Derran. So I look forward to this too. Yeah, so let me just say something briefly about what brings me. First of all, my name is John Barton, and I'm the director of the Center for Faith and Learning at Pepperdine University, and on the religion and philosophy faculty here. But let me just say something briefly about why I'm passionate about this topic and what brings me to this place, and to this conversation. And I can briefly summarize that in three aspects of my life. One is Christian ministry that I've been a part of. One is academic training, and one are just simple friendships. And those kind of overlap with each other. But in the 1990s, my wife and I moved to East Africa to be a part of a church planting mission team. And we were there for a number of years and planted churches in an area that was between 15 and 20% Muslim. And so really my introduction to Islam and to Muslim people and the engagements and interactions of church and Christian faith with Muslims and Muslim communities happened on the mission field, and really happened in the context of church planting. And so, you know, those ideas of what it means to be a witness to the Christ, to plant churches, to be involved in that kind of work, and yet learning as a young man, I was there as a young man trying to figure out how to do that, how to do it well, and increasingly how to do it in the context of cultural and religious diversity, including a number of Muslim neighbors and friends. And so there's that piece of it for me. And then there's the academic piece. In the years that we were in Uganda, I also did academic work. And so I got a PhD in African philosophy. That's my academic training. And you know, anyone who knows about African culture and African history, my studies in African philosophy led me into what's called kind of the triple heritage of Africa, the triple heritage of African religion, which has to do with traditional African religion, Islam and the long history of Islam across Africa, and then Western influence and Christian influence. And that triple stream coming together was part of my academic work in Africa. My academic work continued when I came home, and I had the unique to the States. I had the unique opportunity to go back, even after I had finished my doctorate. I went back, this drives my wife crazy, by the way, but I went back for more schooling. I tell my students that learning is a lifelong process, so I'm trying to model that. It's costing us money and time, but anyway. But I went back and got some more graduate work at Bayin Claremont, which is a confessional Islamic seminary in Los Angeles. It trains imams and Muslim chaplains for the American Muslim context. And I was given the privilege of studying there and doing graduate work in Islamic studies. I was the only non-Muslim in the program, and obviously learned so much about Islam in that context. But then the third and last thing is, in all of this, it's really been the friendships that have pulled me in and continued to motivate me. And I know that's true for Martin as well. I watched a couple weeks ago when Martin and Sheikh Mohammed shared their friendship and their interactions together. And I can honestly say that some of my best friends in the world are Muslims, people that I care about, people that are friends of mine, and I'm friends of theirs, people that are not projects for me, I mean, they're friends of mine, people whose family I know. And that's been very, very important to me. So I would say that's what brings me to this. Christian ministry and navigating all those borderlands there, my academic work, and then just friendships.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, both of you. So to get our conversation going then, let me ask this kind of broad question and let each of you kind of run with it wherever you want to go, and feel free to respond to each other. But how does the church need to move forward in regard to peacemaking across the Christian-Muslim divide? What's the way forward? If you have churches here listening to you in this big topic, what do you want to say to them in a few minutes? I mean, thinking about how the church should act and what they should do, or even what they should be, how should they understand themselves, whatever that might be. What's the word to the church today when we think about being peacemakers, particularly across the Christian-Muslim divide. Barton, why don't you respond to that first, if you will?
Yes, I'm going to reflect a little bit on my own journey to address that question, and go back a little bit also into the trajectory of the church in the past few decades. Don't worry, I'm going to be brief. I think we can recognize that a few decades ago, the lines were fairly neatly drawn between those sections of the church that believed in the primacy of evangelism and those sections of the church that believed in the importance of interfaith dialogue, ecumenism, that sort of thing. And it's as if, part of the church was specialized in one area and another part in the other area. And we criticized each other and emphasized how much more important what we did was above what the other did. I think we've come a long way from that, so I don't want to dwell too long on that, that ancient image of Protestantism in particular. And so myself, for instance, I come from a fairly conservative background. I teach in a fairly conservative theological seminary in a fairly conservative part of the world and society in the Arab world. And I see that the winds are changing and have changed in those areas. And I think this is very good and very important. I think it is arrogant to think that there is only one way of doing ministry. I think it is a belittling of God and the Holy Spirit to think and minimize the diversity of gifts and callings within the church. And so I'm very happy when I see diversity in the church's approaches to ministry and to God's mission in the world. I think we are increasingly also seeing that there's something that brings us together globally as a church. We cannot speak anymore about a monodirectional mission where the West goes east and takes the gospel. We are, missiologists have talked about multi-directional mission, about the church from everywhere to everywhere, a mission from everywhere to everywhere. And this is good as well. When we think about how to live this out globally, the fact that today we have so much in common globally simply because of migration, because of the social media, because of sadly displacement and wars and conflict, has just brought our world into in some ways homogeneity and its heterogeneity. The multiculturalism, multi-religious nature of our societies everywhere. Islam is not a phenomenon out there for you guys in the Western world. Islam is a reality around you. And so we share, as a church globally, we share the reality of living side by side with Muslim neighbors. And I think this is good too. As I began to work at the Baptist Seminary 19 years ago now, and I came out of a specialization or PhD work in the area of the history of Christian-Muslim dialogue and Islamic studies. And I had gotten into this from a personal experience in basically evangelism and ministry in the context of Lebanon. And I came back to Lebanon and realized that dialogue was a bit of a dirty word. when you find yourself in a conservative environment, you use the word dialogue or engaging with Muslims, and you're immediately understood as someone who is compromising your faith. And it seems like in some of these settings, more conservative settings, the only legitimate way of approaching Islam is taking a polemical approach, one that is aggressive. Then you have, I've found myself also in an environment sometimes where speaking of dialogue was seen as an excuse for evangelism. And so you know, instead of being viewed as someone who is liberal or syncretistic in a conservative environment, suddenly I find myself in an environment where I'm viewed as someone just looking for an opportunity for polemics. And so it's this sort of dichotomy, this sort of journey drawn in two opposite directions that made me do much more thinking about whether there are any other options for me. You know, do I have to fit within one of these two extreme boxes? And it's at that time that I began to develop what eventually I was able to publish and talk quite a bit about, which is this a spectrum of attitudes and approaches to Islam and Muslims. It's called the CCAP spectrum, which is an acronym for syncretistic, existential, charismatic, apologetic, and polemical. And I've spent the last 16 years of my life exploring what it means to be charismatic, which is this middle position, which comes from the Greek word kerygma or keriso, which means to proclaim, the proclamation. It's a concept that's quite present in the New Testament, in the Gospel, as well as beyond, that implies usually, in its, if it's taken holistically, it implies this sort of holistic presence, proclamation both in word and in deed about the coming of the kingdom of God. And so I began to explore what it means to be charismatic in our engagement with Muslims. And later, when I began to engage in peace building per se, also to explore what does it mean to do charismatic peace building. And probably the most striking route for me of understanding this position is the incarnation itself. It's God's presence with us. And so God crossing a gap between the divinity and the humanity, coming to us, becoming like us, living among us. And so this incarnational presence is very important. And then the concept of giving oneself to the other, which we see in the cross. And so these two core doctrines of the incarnation and the cross are fundamental to our understanding of what it means to be charismatic. It's very Christ-centered. So in my personal journey, one of the things I've really learned is that it's not very helpful to approach Muslims simply from a Christian position, in the sense of, you know, I am a Christian and you are a Muslim, and we are going to speak about our two religions and dialogue about it and compare and all of that. And maybe that's particular to me because I'm not an ordained minister, so I don't feel that I need to represent the church as an institution. But so I've discovered that when I'm engaged in or living or speaking with a Muslim, my loyalty is solely to Christ himself. And this always helps me, because I'm not there as a representative of a religious institution, seeing who's better or seeing who's going to win the other or that sort of thing. But I'm there trying to be as faithful to Jesus as I can in both behavior and words. And I want to see people drawn to Christ. And I can be very transparent with my Muslim friends about that. And I found transparency very important in my relationships with Muslims. And so being able to say, well, I don't really care about drawing you to Christianity. I don't feel a very strong loyalty to Christianity. Jesus, in fact, was a Jew. He was not a Christian. And we sometimes forget that. And my loyalty is to Jesus. And so I care to shine Jesus. I care that we would learn together about Jesus. And then the last concept I want to share quickly here in response to this first question is what I've come to call also the supra-religious. So the first one was Christ-centeredness, but also the supra-religious. So I've also discovered how liberating being able to move beyond the accountability to an institutional religion, or I don't want to say accountability, but loyalty to an institutional religion can be in my conversations and friendships with Muslims. And these two elements I found very helpful. And so as I engage in the calling of being a peacemaker, and as I find Jesus calling us, such as in the Sermon on the Mount, the role of being peacemaker is to be a reconciler, both inviting people and being ourselves reconciled with God, but then also with one another. And so when I engage in relationship with Muslims, it is not an object-subject relationship. It is a journey together as we move towards God, and we share about what's most precious in our faiths with one another. And for me, it's focusing on Christ and on what he brings in my own life and in my relationships. And so it's not, I find it's helpful to get yourself out of this sort of cosmic battle or competition between religions as you journey together towards God. And for me, being Christ-centered in this journey has been tremendously liberating and helpful in my relationships with Muslims.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and in fact, it makes me think of a couple of things that I'd like to play off of. One thing you said just a minute ago, Martin, reminded me of the title of a book of someone that many of us are familiar with. One of my friends, Rubel Shelley, has a book called "I Knew Jesus Before He Was a Christian," and your comments just a minute ago made me think of that. But you know, when I think about this, and some of this will be saying similar things, but maybe in a different way, is what Martin just said. When I think about what we as the church need to wrestle with when we think about Muslim-Christian engagements and interactions in the world today, I mean, one thing that I think is important for us to acknowledge is our context right now. And Martin mentioned this just a minute ago, and that is we live in a world. We often say that the world is increasingly diverse. Whether or not the world is more diverse today than it was 1,000 years ago is debatable, but certainly we live in each other's backyards. The diversities are intermingling and intermixing, and that's part of the world that we all live in. I like the metaphor. There's an African philosopher named Kwame Appiah who uses the metaphor of walking through an international airport. And he says, if you walk through a terminal at an international airport for 10 minutes, you will hear more languages, you will see more ethnicities, you will rub elbows with more religions and more cultures than our grandparents, certainly our great-grandparents, would have experienced in an entire lifetime. And that's increasingly the experience that we have, and the church has to figure out how to be faithful and how to be a faithful witness in that kind of increasingly diverse global environment. And so, you know, I think that's a really important thing for us to continue to wrestle with. And I also like, and this is another thing that Martin mentioned, and I'll say it maybe in a different way. I think that when it comes to our engagement with Muslims, the starting place has to be not our interpretation of Islam or our understanding of Islam. Our starting place has to be Jesus. And I see a lot of engagements of Christian communities when they're thinking about not just Islam, but other religions or other cultural communities out there. And it's like we almost assume that the first step is to understand and interpret properly this outside thing, and then we'll figure out what our Christian response is to them. And so when it comes to Islam, that usually then divides us, because you have people that will say, well, Islam, if you really understand Islam, you'll know that it is a violent religion. The Quran is a war manual. There may be some good Muslims, but the system they're a part of is this, this, and this, and therefore we need to respond in a certain way. And then you have others that say, no, Islam is a religion of peace, and the Quran is a peace treaty, and therefore we can engage them in the following way. Well, we have our debates about all of that, but I think all of that is backwards. For the church, the starting point is not to come to a consensus between ourselves about how to interpret Islam as a tradition or a history or a religion. For us, the starting point is always wanting to know Jesus and the power of his resurrection, and to share in his suffering, and to love in his name. To know what it means to have Christ formed in us, to use Pauline language there. And so what does it mean to know Jesus? What does Jesus call us to? And then how does that shape our engagements, not just with Muslims or some religion of Islam, but with anyone that we come across, ourselves included. So I do think the beginning place for the church is to ask again, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? What does Jesus teach us about himself and about God, and who does Jesus call us to be? And then I think from there, asking the question, then what is the church? What does Jesus call the church to be? What kind of presence are we supposed to have in the world? And I like the little metaphor. This is developed by Ibu Patel from Interfaith Youth Corps. I'm using it in a little bit different way. But I like the metaphor of asking, what does it mean for the church to be set apart? We talk about the church. We are a set apart people. What is meant by that? How are we to understand ourselves as people set apart? Set apart for what? And I think we can, the metaphor there of, surely we don't think that to be set apart, the church is just supposed to be a bubble of isolation. And this is the metaphor that Ibu Patel talks about. It's not just that we're to be a bubble of isolation or a barrier of division that separates us from other people just for the sake of being a bubble or a barrier. And we're not, not only not a bubble or a barrier, but the church isn't called to be a bomb of destruction where we just sit behind our walls and throw grenades over the wall at our enemies. But certainly there's some sense in which we are set apart not to be a bubble or a barrier or a bomb, but to be bridge builders. That we are set apart for the purpose of the world, for the sake of the world. And so to figure out what it means as communities of Jesus followers to be bridges of friendship and peace and cooperation, and that our bridges, of course, as we go back to Jesus, must be cruciform, must be shaped by Jesus himself and by the cross, and the hard work that means. So, I like that metaphor, but ultimately I think it calls us to say, how do we live in this diverse and diversifying world that we find ourselves? What does it mean to start with Jesus and let Jesus be formed in us as individuals and as communities in our engagement with the world? And what does it mean to be bridge builders of peace, to be people who extend peace? And know how to do the hard work of sacrificial peace building. And so I think at least that there are some starting points that come to my mind.
Great. I'm going to leave you just for a minute. Either one of you want to respond to anything else before I ask another question? Or Garry, feel free to chime in response to those two great answers.
Yeah, it really makes me think, and here's a question that popped up. how do we be the bridge builders, you know? And I was just thinking that myself. Some examples. I wonder if Martin or John can give us some examples of, you know, how do we make this happen? We have great ideas, but how do I initiate? How do I go to the from being to the doing? You know, when I'm in the grocery store and I see someone, a lady with head covering and a man with her, can I go up and say, "Hey, are you Muslim? Can you be my friend?" Or can I show up at a mosque and knock on the door and see if I can be a friend to somebody there? What about, you know, we've talked about iftar dinners, you know, during Ramadan, breaking the fast at sundown. How could I get involved in that kind of thing? And what about inviting Muslims to church? You know, the expectation is that you're trying to convert me, and how do I overcome some of those barriers?
If I can reflect a little bit on that, I think it's simpler than we think, and it begins with our own worldview and our understanding of what the role of the church is and what our place is within that. And I think often, unfortunately, our vision as the church and as Christians within the church is too small. I've been increasingly feeling that, maybe because this past year in Lebanon has been incredibly chaotic with multiple crises, and feeling all the time, you know, could I have been called just for this, just for, you know, I think that I've had an opportunity to do quite a bit over the past 19 years, and I thank God for it and for all the opportunities and the calling, the mission. I'm a person who's very driven by mission and calling. I can't live my life just randomly, but still this feeling that we're too small, our vision is too small, that we don't think sufficiently that we're called to change the world, to transform our nation, to actually be the key to substantial change in a time of crisis like the one we're living in. And I think this is where it all begins. I think it's there in our head, in our self-understanding, in our understanding of the role of the church. And so, you know, you mentioned, can I walk up to a person wearing the hijab in a supermarket? And I mean, yes, of course, but do it because she's another human being, you know. Don't do it artificially. Do it if you find that maybe she needs help with something, or maybe that you need help with something and you need her to help you with something. You know, can I go and knock at the door of the mosque and say, hey, I'm the guy next door in the church over there? Yes, why not? You know, they'll probably be very happy. Now, if they feel, you know, you're kind of acting weirdly and you know, so I don't think we need to push things, but I think we need to seize moments. I don't think we need to create artificial relationships. We need to understand that our world is about relationships. We need to understand that Muslims actually, for the most part, come from cultures, well, you know, from countries where hospitality and relationship and communal living is primary. And even when they're second or third generation Muslims or even converts in America, they're living in a community that is closely knit, that values relationships, that fosters relationships. It is not weird to walk up to a Muslim and strike up a conversation. It's weird not to. It's not weird to talk about the meaning of life and about God and religion and Jesus, and with a Muslim, it's weird not to. I'm telling you this as someone who has grown up in this part of the world. I'm an Arab. I live with many Muslim friends and neighbors. These are the normal things of life. So I think we're called to think about ourselves beyond our individualism and beyond our comfort zones, and see what God will do with us as we start doing that, and to think beyond just what seems to be normal for our lives, you know, to get scared of our dreams and to be frightened by what we seem to be thinking that God is calling us to do. If it scares you, chances are that it might be from God. So if it doesn't, be careful. If you think you're called to a banal life, be careful, it might not be from God. These are my random thoughts about that.
Yeah, I love that picture or the way that you described approaching friendships or approaching people, but not artificially. We don't need artificial friendships. I just wonder how much of this has to do with us learning to live with our eyes open to who God has right in front of us. I do think, and you guys, Derran and Garry, you mentioned this at the beginning just about this series, that so many of these conversations come back to the idea of just friendship, neighborliness. Certainly the Christian faith is one that's built on the idea that when God spoke most clearly in the world, in history, God did so through friendship, by becoming our friend, by extending to us friendly love through Jesus. And I just think how that motivates us. One way that, but you're also asking the practical question, and I appreciate that. There's a side of me that wants to say, when we ask the practical question, let's stay on the deep meaning of practical, and that is practices. How do we continue to practice the disciplines of the Christian faith that lead us to faith over fear and hope over despair and so forth? But I think we can even get more, feet on the ground practical in several ways too. And one of the ways that we have practiced that in our family, maybe 20 years ago, is after we moved back to the States. My wife and I, we were living in Michigan at the time. We were heavily involved in our church, and we were in Christian education, and we were busy in our lives, and our kids were little, and we had a lot of things going on. But we stopped at one point in our life and just asked ourselves. I can remember a Saturday afternoon, where we stopped and asked ourselves, who do we have around our kitchen table? Who do we invite into our home? Who do we extend our hospitality to? And as we did an inventory, we had been missionaries. We lived this mission life. We talked about mission all the time. We were church people. But when we really did an honest inventory, it was hard for us to name people that had been in our home and around our table receiving the gift of our hospitality that weren't already church members or people that looked, thought, and lived very similarly to us. And we kind of took that as a self-indictment and decided to make some commitments in the other direction. And so we started, and it was just that act of having that conversation that started to cause us to walk around in the world with our eyes open, or at least our eyes focused a little bit differently than the day before, and seeing what interactions, what opportunities were presenting themselves to us. And before long, we started to have opportunities to invite people into our home, including some Muslim families and Muslim friends that became very dear friends of ours in Michigan, not just Muslims, but others. And then we started finding ourselves being invited into other spaces as well. And so learning the hospitality, not just of inviting people into our space, but the hospitality of being a guest in someone else's space. And we started practicing that and learning that better. And that pushed our time. We had to pull out of some things at church. I can remember some church people thinking, no, you're not going to be one of our small groups this fall because you're going to hang out with a bunch of who? And yet that's, what are we doing if we're not, if we're just in a bubble of church isolation? And so I think a question like that, who do we have around our table? And that's not just obviously a question about Muslim-Christian interactions. It's a question about our engagement with people in the world in general, and how we show and how we receive peace and hospitality, and then letting God do what God does with that. And so that was a kind of an important way for us to start leaning into some practices with that. And let me say one last thing here. I mean, the topic of this is Muslim-Christian engagements. I also know, obviously there are books we can read. You guys can go on the website of Two Friendships, One Faith, or I'm sorry, Two Faiths, One Friendship with Michal and Maria that we introduced a couple weeks ago. There are projects and events you can become a part of. But as Martin said, I think a lot of it just has to do with the kind of the shaping of our worldview, the way we see the world around us as we move through it, and seeing what God and the Spirit brings in front of us. And that's not just about Muslims. In fact, one of the challenges for some people on this call may be in the United States. I mean, there are just 3 to 4 million Muslims in the United States, and they're congregated in urban areas primarily. So we can talk about these things, but engaging with Muslims or having Muslims over for a meal may not be a possibility. You may not live in a place where you see a hijabi woman at the supermarket. But the principles we're talking about here, and having the eyes for those kinds of engagements in the world, of being hosts and hosted, applies to all of us wherever we are.
That's really helpful. So I do want to give a minute. We don't have a lot of time. This is a question that could go for a lot longer, but we have focused a lot on at an individual level of how to be welcoming, how to see the other, enter into these conversations and so forth. But I am wondering if briefly you might point people, but especially churches, to think about peacemaking, particularly peacemaking across the Christian-Muslim divide, at a larger scale. So there is a lot we can do about just being people shaped by Jesus, to be hospitable and open to other people's hospitality. What does that look like, though, on a grander scale, as far as global engagement, as far as advocacy and way we engage with the structures and the systems around us? What might you say in just a very short time about what's the church's responsibility and opportunities for engagement at that level?
Well, I'll say something very briefly and then let Martin respond to that. But I certainly think, as the church more broadly understood, we must be people who honor the freedom of others to accept or reject the Christian message, because the Christian message doesn't make sense if it can't be engaged freely, which means ultimately rejected. And so I really think it's important for us as the church to honor and to protect the freedom of people to religiously, and to pursue, to listen and to consider and to pursue God in ways that we may or may not agree with, that it's part of our Christian obligation to protect that right and that freedom.
I can think at least of 2 ways to interpret your question, Derran. The first that comes to mind is, we've maybe spoken about personal relationships. And so what about the church? And I think the church, I would almost apply everything I talked about for individual also to the church as the body of Christ. And so the importance for the church to be hospitable, the importance for the church not to be weird, not to be engaging in sort of forced artificial relationships, but the church to be aware, I teach at a seminary, and our curriculum is very much focused on training our students to read society just as well as they read the Bible. Are we able to read society? Are we able to read current affairs, current events? Are we able to interpret the times and to distinguish and discern what is the role and place of the church at this particular time in this particular place and space? And I would think about that both for the church in America, as well as the church in America in the world and globally, and vice versa, and in relationship with one another. So what the church thinks is important, what the church does is important, what the church, how the church thinks about politics is important, how the church understands the relationship of its country to the rest of the world is important. Decisions we make as individuals and as churches everywhere are important for the rest of the world. And this sort of just relatedness in a way. And so we need to think that way. We need to think as church that what we do, what we say, has implications in an organic sort of way on the church globally and on societies globally, and on the relationship of churches everywhere and elsewhere towards their own context and their neighbors.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, Garry, why don't you tie this up for us?
Okay. Well, is there any final word first from John or Martin as we wrap this up? This is a time you had a single message to give, especially thinking about church leaders and church ministry staffs. Is there something you want to say, a sentence that they can take with them?
Let me maybe respond quickly. Sorry, John. We talked a lot about peace building, and this is the Peace Summit. And it could be easy for us, not just for those who hear us, but for us to think that we've moved away from other sorts of callings of the church, and that now we're engaged in this sort of big, grand thing called peace building. And I want to bring us back to the fact, and we talked about that, John and I, tonight, that the centrality of Jesus in all of this. We don't do this because we think it's cool. We do this because we believe it's central to the incarnation and to the cross and to reconciliation. We engage as peacemakers, not as a substitute for proclaiming Christ. It is the heart of what it means to proclaim Christ, both in action and in deed. And I hope that we can keep this in mind. So do not give up the holistic ministry of the church and the diversity of the callings of the church's multiple multiple gifts and callings in the diverse body of Christ. That's what I'd like to leave our friends and all of us with tonight.
I don't think I can improve on that.
Okay.
Oh, come on, John. Surely you can.
No, this has been absolutely a blessing. What a way to wrap up this pathway. And I do want to remind us that this series of pathways is actually going to be, and I'm so grateful to the pathway organizers and leaders of Summit that this will not be the end of of our opportunity to share with others these great ideas. This pathway will be available in recorded form, and so be looking for that. And if you're interested in knowing more, be sure to contact us or the Summit folks to find out how can you get access, because this would be great for Bible class studies, for church leaders and staff to reflect on what does it mean to be this kind of people, these kinds of Jesus followers. And I'm so grateful to you, John and Martin, for being a part of this, and for all of our presenters along the way. I don't know what I'm going to do with my Tuesday noons anymore. You know, this has been such a uplifting opportunity to see the value of these interfaith kinds of friendships and opportunities for engagement that I hope can be the ticket for us to move towards greater world peace, that we can engage people and be an example of what it means to be a Christian in the world today. So thanks to all. Thank you all for joining us. If you're been an attendee of our sessions, we're grateful for your part in this program. Thanks again, Derran, for joining me in this effort. I hope we have more opportunities to do this kind of thing. So blessings to all. Take care.